So I'll give you a bit of a basic introduction, a few perspectives on the nature of the development industry and the development process. I want to talk through just basic generic concepts that we all typically start with in our industry, of which you will be very familiar with because they are the things that typically populate our viewshed and our communities. Talk you through then the majority of the work, basically taking you through each of a generic set of steps that we do. In reality, every project is unique, every team is unique, and the actual simple list, none of us follow it in precise order any given time, but they are the steps that we all have to go through in some sequence and often in a very iterative process. And then just offer a few thoughts at the end about sort of some lessons learned and how we can work together as an industry and a municipality. So, like many things in life, we can say, what is development? Well, we know what development is. Well, even in our world, if you ask each of us in this room, each of our companies does different things. Each of us in the room play different roles in our companies. And so, really, there isn't a simple definition to what is real estate development. The one thing that it does have in common always is land. So typically we would look at what do? We take land and we add value to it. We change it in some way. We maybe upzone it. We maybe build homes. We do any number of things to it. But through a number of steps, we take a piece of land and we do something with it. Now, it's important to distinguish between home builders and developers. Many of them are the same in the case of a full-service developer, but many of them are not. So construction of a home or of a building is typically only one step in the process, and it's actually one of the steps that very frequently has, in the larger picture, very little risk, not too much interaction with the municipality because policies, guidelines, rules, building code are already set, and we move to that level. It has probably the most money associated with it, both in risk and return, but it's actually just one step, and that will become clear as we talk through this process. So this then, of course, brings us to the next question of who is a developer. And of course, we have our favorite developer up there, Donald Trump, from our era of having watched a pretty interesting, colorful character move through this industry. There is basically a first discussion which starts with the land where someone does a plan, maybe rezones something, changes the approvals, goes through a battle around that or a great idea, and they create value and then they sell it. We affectionately call those folks in our business dirt guys. If you then add roads, streetlights, sewers, water, and everything else, you then kind of move up to essentially being what would be a very conventional developer of selling land to builders afterwards. There's also, of course, if you watch the Home and Garden channel, you'll understand how much money one can make renovating interesting old buildings and doing something with them and turning them around and giving them a new use, et cetera. So those are sort of more of the reno guys. There's this other group that is always around us. Sometimes we have to do it, sometimes they're part of our team, which are the deal makers. And really they just love to do the deals. They're not actually necessarily that interested in doing anything with it, they just love the deals. And they're very important because they're the kind of folks who assemble land that give us sites that are large enough for us to do. It's a certain personality type. Within any given company, and again, like I say, all of us in this room, you will find specialists, you will find generalists. When you talk to, say, someone like myself as a vice president of development for a company, I'm a generalist. I have to be able to oversee and generally understand a whole lot of things. If you look at someone who's really working on a much more specific type, they're going to be a specialist, they're going to work in a small part of it. So in a larger company, you'll have specialists just in finance, just in marketing, just in design, just in construction. So each group is slightly different. This, in short order, is sort of the development process that we'll spend a chunk of the next 45 minutes talking about. But really, we start with a concept. We move through a strategy. So this would be a financing and development strategy to figure out, essentially, kind of like doing policy. How are we going to do this? What are we going to do here? We then, of course, need land. Now, very often, we'll actually start this process with a piece of land, especially in areas where it's hard to get land. For instance, in the Lower Mainland, the battles, the bidding wars over the bizarrest piece of land is strange. Some people have been known now for not very large parcels to pay $5 million over what the appraised or what the asking value was simply to secure enough land to keep their business going forward. And that all just simply raises the cost of housing. So the constraints on land really have a very big impact on us. We then take a concept and we start refining our concept so it fits our market, so it fits everything we're doing, and then we have to borrow money for it. None of us are ever wealthy enough to put and actually pay for it. So then we go through a borrowing process. We then come to you and we go through a planning and approvals process for that with our experts, with our consultants, with your staff, with your consultants, and we come to some kind of an agreement. We then sell this project, market it and sell it, hopefully. We build it, and then after construction, there's still actually a lot of work left to do. So let's start with the first process, which is the concept, first stage one. And this really is, what are we going to build? And there's a whole lot of different components of this one. The first one you have to be clear about is you're going to take on risk, you're going to spend a bunch of your life and your time to do this. What are we trying to achieve? So let's just take two examples. If we're going to build a 30,000 square foot strip center here, on First Nations land, usually the purpose of that is what we would call to keep the lights on. That's going to be a fairly quick build, it's fairly small, you sell it or occupy it fairly quick, and you get your money back in. That allows you to pay your salaries, pay your overhead, pay your light bill, pay your taxes, and keep going. The project I've spent the last 4 years on, just down the road here in Peachland, the New Monaco project, is a different type of project. We would call that a legacy project. This is a group of folks with deep patient pockets, and they're trying to make a mark on the world. They're trying to do something that they pull together the best that they have seen around the world and make it happen here in the Okanagan in one project. It's a very different process. We've been at this project for 7 years, and we've only just got through the rezoning last year because of the layers and layers of work. We're on our third set of architects and probably our fourth set of engineers, and we're continuing to refine it. So it's a very different process than keeping the lights on. And so when you're dealing with a developer, they're coming in, some of this process moves quickly, sometimes it moves very slow. Each company generally has expertise. Like every company, it's based on what their staff know what to do and how much they've done. And so you end up with different types of company expertise. Some do just commercial, and some do just residential, some do both, some do mixed use, some do just industrial. So it's a very complex group, and no company is the same as any other company. Then of course there's always the market, and this essentially has to do with what can we sell. So the story around that then is changing on a daily basis, how we respond to that, and that drives a lot of things. And then finally, there's this question of scale, of how big do we want to do this. If the market is slow, you have to do a small scale project. And I'll tell you this story, as you all know, in the Okanagan. There are many very large projects that get themselves into trouble. And one of the number one reasons why is that the scale of the project and the cost of the infrastructure does not match the scale of the market. So there may be 100,000 people over time that will come in to buy all of that, but it's going to take them 45 years to come in. And in the meantime, you're paying for all this infrastructure, and that's the thing that gets large developers, and many of the projects we see here are developers from other regions, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, etc., who are used to hundreds of thousands of people moving in every 10 years, and they're used to this steady pressure of demand. And when we move to a place like the Okanagan, or where I live on Vancouver Island, there's a steady growth curve, the numbers look great, but the actual total number of new buyers is fairly small. And this is why you see problems in big projects, not because they're not viable long term, but because they're not viable in the short term.